Figuring out this issue with the stream manager not showing me any information. Actually, it shows that I'm offline. Wasn't that something? Oh, now we're live. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know why it doesn't seem like we have a Twitch thumbnail, which is, I think, a huge deal. So, I don't know. We might have to stop using Restream. It's also filling up our... Oh, how does this happen? The collab icon means you can click to knock. How would that work? Who would want to knock? Oh, that would be so funny. If I knocked on his... How does that work though? You can knock from the what does the collab though mean? How do we join? Like, how does it actually connect them together? That's what I want to know. Moderator, chatbot. Okay. All right. So we need to just get some work done, I think, and figure this issue out later, even though it bugs me. Like, that shouldn't be empty here, and that really kills us, because if you go into just chatting, I'm sure... Yeah, actually, how does this work? And we were to go viewers high to low. Is there no low to high? Do we just have to go all the way down to the bottom here? Oh, there's a lot of people that have a ton of views. Okay. It's good to know. I think we could also just search for philosophy, right? Is that a thing that we can do? Philosophy? Where do we show up here? Live, yes. Low to high, there we go. All right. Okay, no wait, we've got a thing. We've got a thumbnail. So that's fine. I think we're good. I always have ChatGPT up. Oh man. What's going on here? I guess it's just the channels tagged with philosophy, I was going to say. And yeah, I guess there's a lot of watching videos. Oh, we got a cooking stream. Yes. Absolutely. Good faith. Linear God debates. Interesting. This is what we should be checking, actually, pretty frequently. Seeing who's doing what. And, man, I don't know, but this just looks so clean to me. This my branding here. It's like there's a lot of pictures here that are, you can't even make out what they are. I mean, I guess that's a person there, but it's pretty, unless, obviously I could see it just because like what's going on. These are too small. It's pretty good art. Oh, this is cool. Oh, this is even cooler. What's happening here?
That's the little...
What?
But yeah, I'd probably eat like 100 jelly beans.
How do you do this?
$100, $300 for 100 jelly beans.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. What does this guy do on his channel? Is it always gaming? Would it be videos here? Okay. This is interesting. So maybe it always does that. Maybe this is just a issue with Twitch right now.
Oh, hey, Gem Cave. I found an undead miner. Oh.
Okay, so it seems like a lot of gaming content. Oh, wow. Okay, just running through different games. All right, well, unfortunately, there's less collab potential if we're If there's no active philosophy, nothing as fun as reading notes from affective neuroscience. I'm slightly more high energy than yesterday, so I think we should be cooking. Which is a shame because the part 2 stuff is really kicking off. It's going to get really exciting really fast. All right, we can just start looking through this stuff. I'm going to just start reading through notes, and I think a lot of these notes are kind of either they're out of scope of the document or they are in scope and already incorporated, just because I've obviously seen these before, and I read this prior to actually doing most of part 1. So, several discrete emotions can now be manipulated via the stimulation and blockade of individual neurochemistries. Since these neurochemistries can be easily visualized using neuroanatomical techniques such as immunocytochemistry, our ability to tease coherent systems out of the massive webwork of the brain has become possible in the last few decades. This allows fairly impressive specification of the neuroanatomy. Actually, I'm going to get rid of this now just so that we don't have to find it later. This allows fairly impressive specification of the neuroanatomical trajectories of the executive influences of certain emotional systems. So, do we have something like this where we talk? Yo, Bronson, what's good? Welcome to the channel. We are reading some notes from the book Affective Neuroscience so that we can incorporate into this document that I've got cooking up. The question is, do we have... I might put this in our to-do. Do we have like a paragraph that points out how we know that each of these functional networks are actually doing the function that we think they are? Oh, here, okay. Our understanding of these functional roles has emerged from a wide range of research methods. Lesion studies reveal how damage to specific regions alter perception and behavior. Neuroimaging techniques like fMRI and PET allow us to observe brain activity in real time, and electrophysiological tools such as EEG and MEG track the rhythmic patterns that shape cognition. Nice. Oh, more recently, brain stimulation approaches have offered causal insight by directly modulating neural activity. All right, so we have it. We already have it. How are you? Are you doing reacts? Oh, like reacting to other content? Is that like, am I doing React content? Or is there some Twitch mechanism called reacts that I should be aware of? Because granted, I probably need to learn more about the Twitch space and what's expected, even though I've been here for over a year now. How shall we ever see the neurodynamics of a thought process or a feeling state objectively? Probably through a combination of neurochemical, neurophysiological, and behavioral techniques blended with theoretical inference. That's an important part in the end there. Currently, our most open psychological window into the emotional mind is the use of modern introspective techniques in humans, such as diary and other verbal reports, but empirical developments in this area have been slow because of the conceptual biases of previous times. Yeah, like Philo's... like philosophical videos. Is that a concept that I should, or I'm guessing you're just trying to say philosophical. Sometimes, usually on Fridays. Fridays I do the React content. That's usually, it's pretty much free for all. Like whatever anyone wants us to watch, I'll watch through it. We'll discuss it. We'll relate it to the stuff that we work on here. And yeah, usually that's a little more fun. There's just a lot of work that we have to do. I guess just to give the full picture, I'm trying to build out basically a document, or basically a curriculum of how to live a meaningful, emotionally rewarding, and morally good life. And that starts with the foundational science and philosophy that allows us to make sense of the world and our freedom within it, which fortunately we've actually finished. This is all a draft, so we're kind of in a good position to do React content now. But I'm still making sure that everything's up to snuff in there, and then we have to start working on part 2. Develop a practical framework for identifying and reach and pursuing our goals. Yeah, philosophical. I had good vid, but no one does Reacts with. Really, no one does React content in the art in the philosophy. What's the vid you'd recommend? I could get it ready for tomorrow. At the turn of the century, introspectionism was found to have fatal flaws, and it continues to be evident that humans often do not adequately understand the causes of their own behaviors. Thus, we must remain cautious of introspective approaches for providing much in the way of causal knowledge. Most of emotional processing, of every other psychobehavioral process, is done at an unconscious level. However, introspection can help identify many of the distinct emotional categories and other basic brain functions that need to be elucidated by science. Awesome. Thank you. Discrimination is a moral good and a moral law. Interesting. All right, I'm going to throw this into the watch later playlist on my YouTube thing. So thank you very much for the recommendation. Chances are it'll be like tomorrow at the same time. I'll hop on and then we'll be watching some vids. Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for the follow. Yeah, I've been pretty consistent. Pretty much every day around this time, start getting after it, and yeah, usually productive stuff. But you know, if that includes fun discussions. If you ever want to discuss something in the chat. Even though physicists still cannot see clearly inside atoms, their theoretically inferred knowledge has changed the world. The same will happen with brain. So when was this? I guess this was 1998. I'm curious. Yeah, when did it really blow up when we started looking at subatomic particles? I don't know. The same will happen with brain research on emotions and motivations. Progress at this level requires the continual application of the time-honored but fallacious form of scientific logic known as affirmation of consequence. Although the logical flow of this most common mode of scientific reasoning, induction, is obvious, there is no alternative way to extract general principles from observed facts. In humans, we can now observe some of the internal dynamics of the brain, even though a standardized measure of emotionality that operates in a real-time window is not yet available. Functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, is beginning to approximate the ideal, but as summarized, serious interpretive problems remain. For instance, fMRI can estimate brain activities by measuring regional blood flow or oxygenation changes throughout the brain. But emotions may have undiscovered and unpredictable effects on brain blood parameters that are not simply reflective of neural activities. For instance, it is possible that certain emotions such as fear are characterized by reductions of blood flow to many brain areas as a secondary consequence of emotional intensity rather than as a result of local metabolic needs to fuel neuronal activity. Interesting. Thus, the nature of central affective states must be theoretically inferred from a variety of brain measurements and manipulations, which are related to new predictions of behavioral changes in animals. The resulting conclusions, in turn, must be validated against the verbal reports of human subjects. Through such triangulation procedures involving brain manipulations, behavioral changes in animals, and, where possible, reported mental changes in humans, the scientific conundrum of subjectivity can finally be credibly addressed. Obviously, studies of the intrinsic functions of the brain, such as the nature of the various emotions, are among the most difficult to pursue in neuropsychology related topics like the nature of yeah, I imagine this is tough because it's not just the activation of connections in the brain, which you can read through the electrical sensing. What was the neuroimage can observe brain activity in real time. So fMRI and PET doesn't allow you to see, I'd imagine, neuromodulator release. So like when dopamine is getting released in certain areas that are actually affecting the activation. So it's hard to get the full story here. And then obviously there's a lot happening in the body that's affecting the activity that you do see, but you wouldn't get a good idea of what that communication is. So yeah, I'm curious if like I know people are using AI to learn languages from like certain animals, and I'm wondering if you could do the same thing for the brain. I imagine this is what they are doing. They're using AI to see how the brain is communicating with itself, the brain and the body here, using whatever techniques that you have, like fMRI. Electrophysiological tools track the rhythmic patterns. So this is just, that's pretty similar. Lesion studies. So lesion studies are pretty interesting too, but that's pretty blunt. And then, yeah, so none of these are going to get the granularity. So yeah, what is this? More recently, brain stimulation approaches. This has got to be pretty great, the stimulation approaches. But yeah, there's still so much nuance you're not going to be able to get from any of those. Obviously, studies of the intrinsic functions of the brain, such as the nature of the various emotions, are among the most difficult. Related topics like the nature of the self, the will, and thinking processes also remain neglected by neuroscientists, at least by 1998. Only recently has human psychology returned its attention to these questions under the banner of cognitive neuroscience. Subjective emotional feelings, on the other hand, do not follow the rules of propositional logic, and external reference points, the natural stimuli that evoke emotions, are not as clear-cut except in a few examples, such as the smell of predators described in Chapter 1. Even if such even if such trigger stimuli can be identified, the objects of our feelings, for example, the people we love or the foods we enjoy, rarely have intrinsic logical qualities like the constant speed of the aforementioned clock hand that allow us to conceptually anchor the nature of an animal's internal representations to world events. With affective feelings, other important but as yet unstudied internal representations may be the anchor points for felt experience. For instance, the reference process for specific emotional states may be the arousal of specific neurochemical circuits and anatomical areas of the brain. Okay. Furthermore, the actual generation of actually, I should read that again. That's pretty important. For instance, the reference process for specific emotional states may be the arousal of specific neurochemical circuits and anatomical areas of the brain. Furthermore, the actual generation of affective feelings may arise from the interaction of those circuits with yet other brain systems, such as those that generate the internal preconscious process of I-ness or self-identity. The actual neural mechanisms that create emotional feelings is the central question of affective neuroscience. My assumption is that neural interactions elaborate a variety of distinct paraconscious affective states that have little intrinsic cognitive resolution except various feelings of goodness and badness. Yep, I use the term paraconscious to suggest that higher forms of consciousness had to emerge evolutionarily from specific types of preconscious neural processes, and that the primitive affective systems that will be described in this text may have been the major gateways for the development of cognitively resolved awareness of values that appear to exist in the world. So this is actually very akin to what Damasio says in 2017. So yeah, no surprise there. Pretty clear cut, or pretty intuitive, I should say. As a result of mental maturation, those paraconscious affective systems eventually inform our higher cognitive apparatus, how world events relate to our intrinsic needs, thereby gradually establishing our higher value systems. For instance, one can produce the reappearance of anger in an infant simply by restraining its movement. However, only through maturation can such primitive experiences of anger be symbolically generalized to world events. That some specific person or institution is attempting to symbolically constrain our freedom of action or trying to take something valuable away from us, even something as subtle as our peace of mind. Obviously, those higher interpretations that eventually come to surround our emotional states, let us call them attributions, as is so common, can only emerge from higher brain functions. To my knowledge, the type of affective neuroscience strategy outlined here is the only way we can scientifically understand the neural foundations of the emotions that may be essential substrates for the genesis of the more complex hybrid forms of human feelings. Okay, so that's seems to be a pattern, and this is yet again another way or another. We're saying the same thing that points out that our higher order cognitive functions, such as our experience of meaning, my experience of this being a pen, is afforded to us by connections that are very much involved in connections and circuits that are very much involved in affective networks and regions. So this is how we get in our document. This is how we get the idea. It's really a hypothesis, I guess. It's a strong speculation that, but it's also not. It's also just still following. It's as speculative as like the theory of homeostasis is. That my understanding of this pen being true, as I look at it and I think it's true, is afforded to me by an emotion. We're never actually like completely rational beings without emotion that's literally guiding the trajectory of our rational thought. Or thought that feels rational. To my knowledge, the type of affective neuroscience strategy, okay. Besides the obvious difficulties in measurement, the main dilemma that has reduced the willingness of investigators to utilize affective concepts in neuroscience has been our difficulty in envisioning how internally felt subjective states could have any mechanistic influence in the causal chain of neural events intervening between environmental stimuli and responses. Has been our difficulty in envisioning how internally felt subjective states could have any mechanistic influence. Interesting. There are many non-dualistic ways around this dilemma. We can readily assume, one, that feeling states are not immaterial, but rather true reflections of specific types of neural circuit interaction. And two, that subjective feelings have other functions than the mere governance of unconditional behavioral outputs. In other words, more than the mere generation of instinctual behaviors. Right, our emotional systems are guiding many processes that we are unconscious of, that are internal, that lead to other types of brain interaction, but also lead to other types of chemical interaction throughout our entire body, helping not only our nervous system, but our immune system and our circulatory system. For example, internal feelings may directly mediate learning by coding behavior. Oh, well, obviously this one. This is the crazy. This is the one that is, I think, a little more intuitive. But internal feelings may directly mediate learning by coding behavioral strategies for future use, or perhaps they do this indirectly by interacting with self-representational systems within the brain. Indeed, such an assumption is a central tenet of the present thesis. The apparent flaw with the simple-minded view is that a great deal of evidence suggests emotional responses are much too rapid for feelings to have been aroused. For instance, it takes less than 1/100th of a second for a fear-potentiated startle reflex to be initiated, and it is often claimed that nociceptive information, gets into the relevant flexor reflex circuits more rapidly than it takes for the conscious experience of pain to emerge. The use of such facts to argue against the existence of consciousness in emotional behaviors fails to recognize that the generation of an affective response may be as important for guiding future behaviors as for immediate ones. Thus, fearful contextual stimuli associated with pain may induce a central state of fear that only gradually leads an animal to freeze and to apparently get uptight. So if I were to try to translate that, it's despite the fact that we instantaneously recognize what has happened and our brain does some type of very quick signal about that can trigger processes that you could say linger, but it's almost like it strategically lingers. Like it would activate these states or release these molecules that would affect our emotional state over time for the sake of notifying us, or notifying at least our conscious self, of what's happening, and similarly notifying all these other systems in our brain and body to do something about it. All right, some investigators have advocated the second variant, which suggests that emotional affective responses may be epiphenomena occurring in parallel with emotional responses, but having little role in the control of behavior. These simple-minded views also failed to fully consider that the ancient neural mechanisms of affective responsivity may sustain central nervous system readiness for future response selection that animals exhibit as a result of conditioning. Okay, so I'm going to actually just throw this into Gemini real quick and see if we can get something. Can you help me understand these quotes? I didn't need to do an extra quotation there, but accordingly, a more complex view is taking hold in emotion research, which accepts that emotions operate in a dynamically interactive way at many hierarchical levels within the brain. Two-way communication among levels characterizes the overall organization of an emotional response. In this view, there is a great deal of room for internally experienced affective consciousness to influence behavior in a variety of ways. Let's break down the quotes. In essence, both passages argue against the oversimplified idea that our conscious feelings like pain or fear are either too slow to matter for our immediate reactions or are just useless byproducts. Instead, they propose that the primary role of these feelings is to prepare the brain to guide future actions. So quote 1, this quote tackles the common sense idea that we feel an emotion first and then we act on it. Okay, so I misunderstood it originally then. The author points out that this view seems wrong because our physical reactions are often much faster than our conscious feelings. A fear-potentiated startle reflex happens in less than 1/100th of a second. Okay, so I was kind of right, but I didn't realize that it was actually referring to, like, that initial signal was actually causing some behavior, but then obviously there's still some lingering emotion. So when you touch something painful, the reflex to pull your hand away is triggered before you consciously register the sensation of pain. So yeah, it would be like a simple-minded view to think that like everything needs to happen through your conscious awareness, I should say. Like, you know, you feel the pain, then you do something about it. The author's counter-argument. The author argues that just because the feeling is slower than the reflex, it doesn't mean that the feeling is useless. The purpose of an emotion isn't just to cause an immediate reaction. Instead, its main job is to create a lasting central state in the brain that guides future behavior. Right? Like it could mean releasing the molecules that make you focused on what you can now do. In simple terms, imagine, okay. Yeah, I guess, yeah, imagine you touch a hot stove. The reflex to pull your hand back is instantaneous and subconscious. The conscious feeling of pain and the resulting fear of the stove come slightly after. That feeling of fear creates a new state in your brain that makes you much more cautious around the stove in the future. The feeling wasn't for the immediate reflex. It was for the long-term learning and preparedness. So, yeah. And then this quote, the second one, addresses a different but related simple-minded view, the idea that feelings are just epiphenomena. An epiphenomenon is a byproduct of a process that has no effect on the process itself. Think of the heat coming off your laptop. It's a result of the computer working, but it doesn't help the computer run. This view suggests that feelings happen alongside our physical emotional responses, but they don't actually cause or influence our behavior. They're just along for the ride. Yo, Onion Helmet, what's good? We're learning more brain stuff. The author, again, says this view is too simple. It ignores that these ancient emotional systems are crucial for creating a state of readiness in the central nervous system. This readiness allows an animal or person to better select future actions based on what it has learned from past experience. Okay. So that's pretty simple. Affective consciousness may not be as important in instigating rapid emotional responses as it is in longer-term psychobehavioral strategies. Indeed, in humans, the cognitive apparatus can greatly shorten, prolong, or otherwise modify the more hardwired emotional tendencies we share with the other animals. As we will see in subsequent chapters, evidence indicates that internally experienced emotional states are neurologically rather primitive, since they appear to be triggered by the arousal of various subcortical emotive circuits. This suggests that the mechanisms of affective experience and emotional behavior are intimately intertwined in comparatively ancient areas of the mammalian brain, but we are just beginning to figure out how, exactly where and how. And I imagine they've done a lot since 25 years ago. It may be in the higher reaches of emotional systems such as the amygdala and frontal and cingulate cortices, as many believe. It may be in various regions of the brainstem. In sum, a comprehensive discussion of emotions must pursue a difficult triangulation, considering affective experience, behavioral body changes, and the operation of neural circuits concurrently. For research purposes, it may be useful to separate these levels of analysis, but for a comprehensive understanding of both the mind and the brain, as well as for more accurate prediction of behavior, the various lines of knowledge need to be blended together into an integrated whole, as they are in the functioning organism. That's nice, as they are in the functioning organism. All right. The overriding premise here is that the most fruitful search for a fundamental understanding of affective consciousness will emerge from a study of pre-conscious neural mechanisms that represent the organism as a coherently acting creature in the world. However, even in the absence of definitive knowledge, it is still important to recognize how deceptively wrong our explanatory schemes may be if we do not take the nature of emotional consciousness into consideration when we study the brain mechanisms that control behavior. If basic forms of consciousness emerged in ancestral species that preceded humans in the face of the earth, an understanding of the neural instantiation of those processes as reflected in all living descendants is bound to inform us profoundly about the nature of our own conscious abilities. Now, what is going on with this thing? An approximation of the emergence of affective consciousness in evolution. The important point is that different levels of consciousness probably emerged during different phases of brain evolution. Interesting. Years in million. Crazy. All right, so this is still the simplistic view of like reptilian brain, and then this is probably limbic system. But I think this still stands. Like this chart would probably still stand with these things. It's just that all the parts of the brain, it's not like they were just kind of added on and then not evolved while everything else was evolving on top of it. Okay. So here we go. Reflexive behavior. Actually, we should go backwards because that's the most intuitive. Awareness of awareness. That's really intuitive. We know that we can do that. But self-awareness. So awareness of self. But it's so weird to think about awareness of self without awareness of awareness. But I could see it being a case. Yeah, awareness of awareness is kind of a crazy thing to come about. Especially if through that the broader homeostasis view that like our ability to get like a sense of our own awareness helps us out in our, I mean, obviously does, you know, we do have significant advantages in cognitive abilities, but cognitive awareness, so this would be like I imagine more high fidelity, like thoughts about things that aren't necessarily yourself. Affective awareness, this is just you can understand that that feeling is good or bad. Reflexive behavior, this is just, you know, there's no thoughts to be had, there's no feelings to be had. I'm guessing this is feelings. But affective awareness, maybe this is just feelings. I don't know. Maybe cognitive awareness is feelings and the images. Opinion on the view that Adam was not the first human or human-like species, but was the first to receive revelation. Therefore, evolution is compatible with creationism. All right, let me think about this. Opinion on the view that Adam was not the first human or human-like species, but was the first to receive revelation. So I'm the first to become self-aware. Once again, or not once again, but I think it's important to point out how slow and incremental evolution is, such that it's very hard to draw the line of when when the species was self-aware and when they weren't self-aware. Like, even though we're making these lines here, these aren't step functions. Like, it would be very difficult for us to consider what the experience of self would be like along this trajectory. Like, you're getting a more high fidelity version of self throughout that. But then you can, like, once again, if we're going to take the Bible to be some type of abstraction on this matter, then I do like that interpretation much more than therefore evolution is compatible with creationism. I don't know how that second sentence fits. Isn't creationism like the 6,000 year old universe? It would be more so that I don't think it would be compatible with creationism. It would just be that the story of Adam and Eve are actually compatible with evolution rather than evolution being compatible with creationism, I think. But then once again, as Alex O'Connor pointed out, like it is kind of a paradox of the fall is kind of paradoxical in its own nature, in its own conceptual nature. I mean, granted, that's a way to make sense of how humans would have gotten self-conscious, but it's not that beneficial to us now. Creationism, as in the biblical law view, not the world is okay. What's the creationism as in God? So yeah, I would say that it's still like, I think if anyone made that claim that therefore evolution is compatible with creationism, I don't think they understand what evolution is or what it means. And what do they think God is actually doing by making so maybe this is more of a contemporary view though. But the idea is still that these levels of consciousness arise out of this same interpretation of homeostasis, that all of these different awarenesses provides the organism with significantly more information, and therefore allows them to act with with a better sense with a better chance of survival, and not just cognitively or not just consciously, but their whole body is able to react to every part of these, every level of these consciousness. So through that idea, that makes sense of how even we would arrive at awareness of awareness, and we know how evolution works. So what is God doing? He's not making anyone in his image. Like this is brute natural selection, and we know why it's, and homeostasis tells us why we would develop like this. Evolution is compatible with the Bible is a better sentence. Evolution is compatible with the Bible. Yeah, so I mean, then the Bible would just be something akin to what which is something closer to what we would think it is, which is just people's interpretation of what happened, in a way that makes sense to them. So yeah, we'd have to just be very clear about them, what these stories are saying. If we're saying that we were made in God's image, or that God made the trees and the and the animals, then it's hard to say what God is. God is just nature then. You're creating a conceptual rule set where now God must be nature and not like God is not even, like God doesn't have a will in that sense. God as a concept now is conceptually tied to evolution. It's called progressive creationism, old earth creationism, or theistic evolution. Interesting. Yeah, I would have to. So what I would do is I would look into that fuller interpretation, and I would see where they see if and where they make some type of implication about God that I think is not, that they're not allowed to make, given this conceptual connection. Like, I don't think you can say that God is therefore now omnipotent or omniscient. God is simply a description of like nature. Now, I think it's a much more nuanced and high resolution interpretation to say that God is that thing that humans interpreted to make sense of their consciousness. That's why, like like in this document, we talk about how everything that we experience, all the meaning we experience, is through this lens of consciousness. So when God said, "Let there be light," any type of idea, any type of meaning is through this light. This is all God's work. God made the trees. Well, trees are concepts that we understand. God made the trees. God made the animals. I understand what the animals are. That's through the lens of consciousness. And then obviously God punishes. When I do something I think I ought not to do, my conscience will punish me. God is, once you get to Jesus, now this is more like higher order strategies for how to not get to be depressed, I think. It's like, God is forgiving. Okay. They say God does have a will, but that his will was for evolution to take place. Yeah, so I think that's where I would say, okay, then you don't understand what evolution is or how evolution works. There's no lever in evolution to direct it. This is the whole idea that Dawkins points out with his. Actually, this is in our references. Evolution does not unfold with a specific purpose in mind. The Blind Watchmaker. Dismantling the idea that complexity in nature implies a conscious designer, he argues that the process of natural selection, acting cumulatively over geological time, is a sufficient explanation for the diversity and complexity of life. It is blind because it has no goals, no foresight, and no purpose. The perspective is crucial because it helps to solidify the understanding that the trajectory of evolution is not a preordained path, but a historical process that can only be understood retrospectively. Yeah. Yeah, and then once again, like this is we could go full Alex O'Connor, and it's like we could point out how much death and suffering is required for evolution to even transpire. And what are we dealing with here? Who's this God that is making evolution happen? God, so you would if God was the director of evolution, then he made organisms affectively aware. Almost, actually, I don't know where this would be. This is a weird type of. I don't know what the scaling here is. Is this like 100 or is this like 50? You know, many millions of years ago, right? We're talking a lot of living organisms. We're talking about a lot of deaths. He made organisms affectively aware, which means they could feel. So this God made organisms feel just so that they could suffer. Like, what is going on here? And then they made them even more cognitively aware so that they could realize that they're suffering, you know? It would be barbaric for this God to exist. It would be insane just so that you know, how many millions of years ago were humans? 10? I actually don't remember. Just so that like humans could do something that they think is good in the world. Like that's insane. Well, God also floods the whole earth in the Bible. That is true. That is true, which once again we can make sense of really easily in the sense that these peoples were along the Fertile Crescent, and floods were very likely to happen. And yeah, you would have to consider, why is this flood happening? You know, what is going on? And there's always going to be people not listening to God, right? We're all sinners at the end of the day. So then you could consider, we were punished for this, for our sins. It's it's probably not worth dwelling on too long, honestly. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's tough. Like, on one hand, I feel like the scoreboard's posted. On the other hand, there's a lot of people that still believe one way. So we have to kind of consider strategically, like, how is the best way to talk about these topics so that it's pretty clear. And I don't know. I think that's why I think just having Evolution Day once a month is really important. I think people just don't understand evolution. I think evolution is actually quite a complex topic, and yeah, pretty central. And I feel like on one hand, I probably don't even understand the most, nuanced complexities of evolution. We should do days like that. And then on the other hand, I think we should just do days where we lay out in the most simplest terms we possibly can. Like what is the most simple way we can communicate evolution in a way that isn't just organisms adapted? Because I think that's what people kind of understand. People kind of consider, like, okay, how do organisms adapt? Who's growing wings while they're alive? I can't trust Richard Dawkins anymore because he keeps saying he is a cultural Christian, whatever he means. He is attending mass, or does he just put up Christmas trees in December? It is a mystery. Yeah, at this point, I just feel like with all these, so I think a really nice rule to go by my favorite, not my favorite, but I don't know. I was trying to make like a funny tagline. By the musical artist JPEG Mafia. He's got this album called All My Heroes Are Cornballs. And that really stuck with me, you know? Especially in the wake of Jordan Peterson doing the stuff he's done. I had always been a fan of, Kanye West's music, and he's been cornballing for the past 10 years. And yeah, all kinds of people. We could see, the Bill Burr doing the stuff right now. I don't know how that's going to transpire, but I just now assume that everyone has an arc, and they're not going to be as what I find or what other people find respectable for their entire arc. So, even if Richard Dawkins is saying stuff now, even if Jordan Peterson says stuff now, like that doesn't mean we should throw them out. Like, I don't think that means that we should just chuck away their entire catalog or all their ideas or whatnot. I think there's something to be gained still. And it's also it's always interesting to make a speculative or I should say a high speculation case study out of these figures. Everyone's a scientist until the Anglican communion attendance rate halves. Interesting. I don't understand what that one means. The Anglican communion. I thought intellectuals throughout history were always honorable, smart people. Lo and behold, I checked the Wikipedia entries for, I don't know, some philosopher in 1500. Guess what? Yeah, I don't know. They probably, did something that we would find abhorrent today. Or they did something that people found abhorrent then, which is even crazier. But yeah, there's all kinds of stuff like that. The smartest minds, the people that are making stuff. I'm not going to go full Kanye West and say like all geniuses are crazy, or say that all the people have that actually make stuff that's important, or have some crazy thing going on with them. But we'll see. Heinous. Have you seen what Martin Luther wrote? No, I don't know what he wrote. All right, we got to get past this this wonderful diagram we've got. Degree of awareness. This is really cool. This is just a terrible chart, actually. If I were to, yeah, this is an absolutely. This should be on that subreddit of terrible charts. Not because all the content here is really interesting, but doing this as an axiom or as a axis is absolutely terrible. How am I supposed to understand anything in between these? Like really, what this is what this is just showing is that a lot of this development happened very fast, and then I guess this is kind of significant, this part of the graph. But I just don't see the span of years. Like, I don't understand what the range is between any of these. Like, how much time? I mean, it's cool to see that, this is 250 years, but how much time transpires in between 250 and when the reflexive behavior has come? It's very difficult to understand. So, yeah. The Church of England is part of the Anglican Communion. I'm sorry. Everyone's a scientist until the Anglican Communion halves. So why would he be affected by the halving of the Anglican Communion, though, if he didn't start out there? Like, where's the logic where he would want to now join because it halved? Or what was the only thing that he didn't like about religion was that it was too inclusive, and now he likes the exclusivity. Speaking about the Aplasia mollusk, this creature, along with several related invertebrates, has provided a preliminary understanding of non-associative forms of learning such as sensitization, the spontaneous increment in behavior that can occur with repetition of a stimulus, habituation, the spontaneous decrement in behavior that can occur with repeated stimulus, and dishabituation, the elevated response tendency that occurs when stimulation has been withheld for a long period of time. All right, instrumental or operant conditioning occurs when animals begin to emit seemingly intentional or voluntary responses to obtain certain changes in the environment, such as the avoidance of negative events or the occurrence of positive ones. The trick to generating the fastest and most successful forms of operant conditioning is to rely on response systems that animals use spontaneously in their everyday interactions with the world. Animals are most likely to emit conditional instrumental responses by molding pre-existing tendencies within their spontaneous behavioral repertoires. For instance, a rat's fear system, I love how it's always capitalized. A rat's fear system can produce unconditional freezing and flight, which are quite easy to obtain during simple contextual fear conditioning. Simply giving an animal a foot shock in a test box is sufficient to evoke freezing whenever the animal is returned to that environment. However, if the animal has an avenue of flight, it will rapidly learn to escape the situation. By comparison, it is difficult to train rats to press a lever to avoid foot shock. Such responses are quite unnatural for the animal. Well, all right, we gotta actually, we gotta find this Jordan Peterson clip. Or I should say edit. Jordan Peterson, Rat. Is it Rat King? Was this it? No, I think it's this one. Yeah.
Rat is this. The rats are all like this. The rat goes like this. So the rat's like this. The normal rat is like this. That's the normal rat. Like this, like this. It sniffs. It's like this for quite a while. He's like this. And then maybe he sniffs. You are now a normal rat.
So he's talking about the fear system. So that's maybe whenever that comes up naturally, we play that video. That's got to be a 10-pull video on this channel. Seeing as he's Christianity, an important part of his identity, it's ironic, right? Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm curious if he's just had so many debates with like Christians that he's figured out a way to like mold it into his identity. Like he's been thinking about Christianity for so long now, because he's been defensive about it. Like maybe like Alex O'Connor, like he's. All right, what is important here is that Aplasia, as all other animals, have endogenous behavior generators that make them spontaneously active creatures in their environment. Endogenous means within the body, right? As opposed to exogenous. Right, and are exogenous hormones like SSRIs? Is that... I think that's right. So these mollusks have endogenous behavior generators that make them spontaneous. So they have, some type of internal mechanism that affects their behavior, but based on the environment. So that's pretty cool. A biological understanding of such intrinsic neural processes provides an essential foundation for the construction of a coherent scientific understanding of mammalian emotionality. Each major emotion has intrinsic response patterning mechanisms, and one of the main functions of higher brain evolution has been to provide ever greater flexible control over such mechanisms. However, it is important to remember that neither animals nor humans can learn everything simply through the clever manipulation of reinforcement contingencies, as some early behaviorists believed. The range of flexibility is sometimes constrained by the design features of emotional systems. However, a certain amount of output flexibility is a design characteristic of most operating systems, including emotional ones, providing several behavioral options that can be the raw material for optimization of learned behavioral strategies. Of course, the expression of most intrinsic behavioral control systems are intermediate. Intrinsic components are rapidly modified by procedural learning. For instance, whereas the courting songs of some avian species, we should get that other clip ready. I don't think I still have it, but what was it? It was the do we have it here? Oh no, we don't. What was the bird? What was the dancing bird? We should just have all these videos ready to go whenever it comes up naturally. Whereas the courting songs of some avian species appear to be largely innate, other species acquire their characteristic song with the help of learning. Oh, okay, that's cool. They must be exposed to the song of their species when they are young so as to have an appropriate memory template later in life for generating their species' characteristic song. Indeed, the acquired template of some species is so flexible that members will try to imitate the songs of other species if these are all they have heard during critical periods of early development. As always, most behaviors are intermixtures of innate and learned tendencies. So that's like culture arising in avians. There it is. There it is. Western. Is this it? Dance? Oh no. It's a bird. Bird. Nope. Oh, yep. Okay. Perotia? Oh, I literally just spelled it wrong after I just looked at it. Oh, look at this. Netflix is a whole thing? Okay, this is the one we saw. But here we go. Oh, yeah. That's like a ballerina type of like up on your toes. Oh, yeah. So this isn't even a song. I'm curious, though, if the dance here is learned at all. We should actually look into that right now. Oh! All right. Western Prussia. Let's get this going. Is the dance partly learned or entirely genetically instilled? If that's the right way of saying it. I love this little guy. You know, they clean the place they're staying at. Oh, that's really cool. Is that... Do you know if that's... This is actually hard to know. I'm wondering if it's because of... Simply because of they don't want to be somewhere that's dirty, or because it's actually like a display of... Not wealth, obviously, but a display that you know, it's a social display. Other people will think more highly of someone with the clean room or whatever, wherever it is. Okay. For mating. Oh, cool. Okay, makes sense. The courtship ballerina dance performed by the male Western Perotia. I'm gonna just call it Perotia. I don't even know how to pronounce. I butchered that. Pronunciation. This doesn't look like... Perotia, right? SH? I think that would definitely mean Perotia. Okay. is not purely genetic nor purely learned. It's best understood as a hybrid, innate components plus learning and refinement. Here's what the evidence suggests. What appears to be innate. Males seem to have a built-in blueprint or tendency to perform courtship dances. In birds of paradise, more generally, young males begin showing rudimentary display behaviors before they acquire the full ornamental plumes. The sequencing of certain moves, bowing, spreading, flank plumes, waggle, appears to follow a species-typical choreography, suggesting that selection has wired in the order or framework of the display. I'm curious how evolution goes that way. Like, how is the sequencing of this dance like accumulated over natural selection? Variation in behavior is heritable. Sons tend to resemble fathers in displayed traits, timing, precision, implying a genetic component. What suggests learning, practice, and refinement? Young males do practice before attaining adult plumage. They perform rudimentary versions of the dance, often in isolation or with other juveniles. That's so cool. Like, just a bunch of dudes doing the dance. Oh, the video by Netflix shows them cleaning. That's cool. They observe adult males and refine movements over time, gradually perfecting the choreography. This display is precise and demanding. Small errors in timing, posture, or movement might reduce mating success, providing selection pressure to refine through experience. So could they? Could humans? Could we? I should say, can we? Can we determine what would be the optimal dance with our current evidence and technology? Do we have an instance of the best dance on film? Like, what does the best one look? Free my boys. They just want a wife and some kids. I mean, look at all the things that humans do. Abolish the dance. All right, one that touches both behavioral okay. Let's separate this into three parts. What optimal could mean in this context, what the data allow us to infer, and what we actually have on film. Just as an aside, I've got this controversial take that data, even though it's plural, like I think we use it as singular so much that I think we should just use it, like, I think we should just say what the data allows. You know, it's not like grammatically traditionally correct, but I just don't see this as like a useful thing anymore. Okay. Like what the data tells us. That sounds so much nicer than what the data tell us. All right. What optimal would mean biologically? In evolutionary terms, the optimal courtship dance would be the one that maximizes male reproductive success. In other words, mating rate adjusted for costs. However, optimal doesn't mean there's one single ideal choreography. Right. I'm wondering if we've like come up with some ideal rule set, and then obviously it's probability based. It's not certain, and then we just use that model on videos. What the evidence says about optimization and variation from current fieldwork, studies have filmed dozens. Oh, that's not enough. We need more than dozens. Displays from multiple individuals and sites. And analysis shows remarkably consistent sequencing, but micro variation in tempo. Females inspect males closely from the ground level during the dance, suggesting that subtle precision may be what differentiates high-quality performers. So far, no single male has been declared the best in a formal behavioral sense. There's no quantity. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, I don't think there's enough data. I'm asking for too much. We gotta say data and datas. I just feel like it's one of those words that could be used as both. Like, do we have other words like that? think we do. I just can't think of any off the top of my head. Absolutely butchering the Latinate words like in all English history, a sacred pastime. Absolutely. I'll do it again. All right. Of course, the expressions of most intrinsic... Okay, so we did this, right? Yeah. As soon as newborn animals interact with the world, their brains are changed forever. Oh, that's a bar. That deserves a bold. I'm probably never going to go back to these quotes, but that deserves a bold. Mere exposure to objects and situations probably also increases our comfort level with and preferences for many items and events. Right. This is what we're talking about in the next major section that I'm going to read and make a video on. The shaping of experience, which touches on not just genetics, nature, and nurture, but then neuroplasticity and learning, emotion-driven plasticity. So this is going to go right into the wheelhouse of affective neuroscience. And then memory, pattern recognition, and habitual interpretation, all to bring up this idea of the shape of our understanding. Like, you know, what is our understanding, given that when we think about something concrete like a pen, we're leveraging these brain networks that are involved in memory and pattern recognition. So then what would the pen be? And it would have to be somewhere within those connections. All right. This is a very hopeful finding for the future of the human race. We may be able to develop positive bonds to other cultures and other viewpoints, especially if we use television and other modern modes of communication effectively. Who's going to tell them that instead we made slop talk? In short, our natural xenophobia may be counteracted by certain kinds of early education. Right, so that is like a thing that I think humans are getting familiar with in the past 10 years. Of course, this obviously led to things like people being upset about diversity in media. And so it's not really been a completely smooth transition, but I think a lot of people do appreciate seeing diversity in the media they watch, and I think it is affecting how just innately racist people are. Natural xenophobia may be counteracted. Okay. It's like asking for hot ice cream. It's tough, but I think there is probably some positive effects. Granted, a lot of negative effects, but some positive effects of getting that exposure. We do not know to what extent these long-term behavioral effects reflect changes in how animals and humans consciously process information. All of the preceding phenomena could be mediated at unconscious levels of neural processing. It is only when we begin to see very complex adjustments of behavioral sequences in response to systematic changes that we need to strongly suspect the presence of conscious processes in action. Right. So this is another lens through the homeostasis interpretation that we could view consciousness as having a significant reason for coming about, which is learning. Like the precision of the type of, or the complexity and precision of our learning is increased, where now our conscious attention can go to very specific concepts or very specific parts of our body. Like, we had that discussion about how we could literally think about like our foot and have that be like a trigger for a bunch of processes from there. The overall lesson seems clear. Higher animals are not simply passive reflex machines responding to environmental stimuli in stereotyped ways. Rather, they are spontaneously active, spontaneously flexible generators of adaptive behaviors, guided by an apparently conscious appreciation of events. But even at the lowest levels, behavioral spontaneity is achieved through the types of flexible neural circuits animals possess, whereby behavioral Master routines govern a variety of subroutines. All right. And master routines we can associate with these higher order functional networks. So, you know, arousal readiness, attention, salience, and relevance. Obviously, deliberate thought and control, that's kind of high level, but spontaneous thought is probably like mid-level, I'm guessing. And then obviously habitual action routine is probably the lowest level that we could get. Actually, I don't know, but habitual action routine is probably all over the place because it's using autonomic parts of our brain while also leveraging the higher order parts of our brain to habitualize higher order thought as well and higher order processes. So very much interconnected. And then, yeah, the other thing that we make clear in the brain's evolved structure is that the lower parts of our brain seem to have a certain type of authority over the higher parts of our brain, both in the sense that, you know, as we discussed the other day, that our literal gut feelings help us, or actually like affect our rational thought, but also obviously when something goes wrong, you know, those parts of our brain are going to make our attention go to what's going wrong, no matter what we're trying to think. So it would be something like, you know, you have to take a test, but I'm going to put a jar right here, and in that jar is going to be a gnarly spider. And no matter how much you really want to try to pay attention on this thing, that spider is going to demand your attention until you get over it. I think maybe it'll take some time, but you could probably get over it after a few days of that. I don't know. Another thing would probably be that you would want voluntary exposure. But wait. How many languages do I speak? I speak 1 plus coding languages, so 1.2, I'll just say. Yeah, unfortunately, I just didn't learn a language early enough, and now I didn't have an appreciation during school to learn a language, and now that I'm at this age, I would love to learn more languages. However, it's very difficult and takes a lot of time, and requires that I like immerse myself in the language. Which I can't do. So I'm kind of at a loss right now in terms of learning new languages. I'm hoping that eventually I'm actually kind of also thinking right now that it's probably not worth spending the effort unless you're already a multilinguist, because of all the technology that's going to allow us to speak in other languages, whether it's through some interface or whatnot. Which languages would you want to learn? For example, I would want to learn, pragmatically, I would want to learn Spanish and probably Chinese. But aesthetically, I would want to learn French. I think that's just a language that sounds cool and sounds nice. And then maybe German, so I could read Being in Time Again in German. I don't know if that would be fun or not. At some point in brain evolution, behavioral flexibility was achieved by the evolution of conscious dwelling on events and their meaning, as guided by internally experienced emotional feelings. I will argue that these emotional values are a fundamental property of emotional command systems, and that such values are instantiated by raw feels, the various forms of affective consciousness that all mammals can experience in the intrinsic neurodynamics of the brains/minds when specific neurochemical systems of the brain become active. Right. For example, bonjour. Buongiorno. Yeah, I think it would be nice. I'm curious. Yeah, like the other thing that's going to be an issue though with learning a language is because I'm doing it so late. I don't know if my motor movements, like my mouth motor movements, are even able to speak these languages well. So I might learn the language. I might be able to hear the language, but I might not be able to speak it well. whereas people who learn a bunch of languages, especially young, can speak these different languages in many different ways. Like similar to how it might be very difficult for me to do an accent that I'm not familiar with. You can learn them with the IPA. The mouth is a muscle. That's what linguistics do. What's the IPA? Yo, thanks for following. I don't know how to pronounce that, but yeah, I'm gonna do it once. Ayo, Hezek, Kaya, Oo, I, GG, DT, 2456. Welcome, welcome. International Phonetic Alphabet. It's a list of all the sounds, phonemes a human can make. Okay, so you would train in that first, I imagine. You would get used to all those different sounds, and once you have that, you're good, right? Like you can now apply all the different sounds to any language and probably any accent as well. Granted, you would still have to work to build up now like the full mode of, okay, I'm speaking this language, so now I need to use these rules. For example, you can see how the mouth muscles move when you pronounce the French R and try to replicate them. Then it's just a muscle memory thing, right? Yeah, and then you just have to build up the muscle memory. Which is like akin to like learning an instrument, I imagine. It's just you got to do it. I guess that's with everything. That's going to be part 2 of the document. It's going to be one sentence. You just got to do it. That's how you achieve your goals. All right, on top of the intrinsic values and the relatively limited flexibilities of the basic emotional systems of the brain, there are layers of learning mechanisms that can yield greater behavioral flexibility and new habits when an animal's circumstances change. Although we now know a great deal about the neural mechanisms that mediate various forms of learning, the basic nature of the reinforcement processes that mediate the emotional learning remain largely unknown. Ah, interesting. And this is 1998, so maybe this is not as unknown now, but at least we now know where to seek answers to such questions within the neural interactions of the emotive command systems of the brain. Only by understanding such processes can the unavoidable gaps between stimulus and response and reinforcement and a resulting change in behavior, as quoted by B.F. Skinner, be filled with substantive knowledge. Here's the main argument for our understanding of possible meaning. This is me. I wrote that. Affective experiences are internally generated by neuronal mechanisms that arose to respond to categories of life-challenging events that bombarded our ancestors during the long course of brain evolution. For instance, hunger helps signal energy depletion, not necessarily because immediate energy reserves are dangerously low, but because certain forms of energy depletion were encoded as affective, anticipatory tendencies within the brain during untold eons of evolutionary development. In other words, it is more adaptive to anticipate future energy needs than to respond simply to energy emergencies when they arise. Right. Apparently, there was no simpler way to do this than for evolution to generate the potential for aversive hunger-type feelings within the mammalian brain. I don't know if that sentence is appropriate. Like it's as if like someone had a choice, or if simple is always what evolution does, or like the direction evolution always takes. Emotions, especially when they can connect with learning mechanisms, also appear to have this type of anticipatory character. The arousal of feeling states helps channel activities of the cognitive apparatus and thereby facilitate behavioral choices. Okay, so this is, yeah, I was probably, I think I was right about this. I think this is pretty apt. So this is where we can consider why we even have a concept of possibility, why that would arise over time, or why the ability to have a concept of possibility would arise over time. And you can think about it very clearly through this anticipatory homeostasis interpretation that, you know, we consider possibility because it helps us survive. It helps us either to do something now that will help us in the future, or to not do something now that we think will hurt us in the future. The arousal of feeling states helps channel activities of the cognitive apparatus and thereby facilitates behavioral choices. Thus, it is easy to understand why basic emotional systems evolved to control much of the cognitive apparatus. It is safer and wiser to anticipate possibilities rather than to deal with them once they are squarely in your face. Why did laughter evolve, and why are certain things funny throughout time? That is the premise of a video I want to make. And I think it's communication. I think laughter evolved to communicate something, like you know, literal information to other people that they understand what you're trying to say. But we can go deep into that. I would want to go deep into that, and I think it's completely unrelated for everything, and you know, for the scope of the document here. But I think it would be useful just to know. I think it's a good case study, or like it's a good example of evolution and stuff like that. I remember a Soviet paper on it. I forgot its name, but it was supposedly very influential. Yeah, I think I could make a couple controversial statements in that video, which I think I might do, but it kind of puts us on, you know, it makes it a little political, which is not great. But people always have this people make this argument often that, you know, hey, but this thing is funny, and they almost imply that therefore it's good, and the nuance here is like, at this point, we can understand why something's funny, but that doesn't necessarily mean like we ought to entertain it. And how would this? I feel like I had a way of connecting this with the idea that we like humor and laughter is like a signal of some sort. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'll have to think about that. I doubt it's controversial. Well, it depends how on the nose I try to be. A lot of these things imply very controversial things that I don't want to necessarily say out loud. But we can always I think that's a good place to be. You do the thing that is like has underlying effects on what, you know, beliefs people have that are like higher up than that. But if you have this, like if you understand what we're saying in this video and you believe it, then now it's going to cast doubt on other beliefs that you may or may not have that conflict. And provided that we are grounded in science, then we hopefully win out. One day I'm going to say that, and the opinion is going to be some medieval. Yeah, I wouldn't want to do anything to jeopardize the constitution of this entire community. I think you know, if I'm going to be canceled, hopefully I've already jump started like a whole autonomous community such that it doesn't matter if I'm there or not. But right now I gotta be on my best behavior. Not that it's not that I have a bunch of controversial things I want to say, but I think it's just this is why another reason why I want to keep this not political. I think I just want people to be to be generally comfortable here and not to. We'll see who cancels who. Oh man, I don't know if we want to joke right now. It's actually it's so funny. This is another instance where it's so funny, but I just don't want to joke about it because, you know, Jordan Peterson has been quite influential to a lot of the ways I think about the scope of this document, at least. You know, he seems to be in like a terrible condition right now, and apparently it wasn't because of mold due to the attic. It was that he just had mold in his house. So now everyone's clowning on him, saying that he should have cleaned his room. So I can't. So like that is something where it's like, that is most obviously, I think the whole point of the laughter and the laughter video would be that language, or that funniness is cultural, and therefore there's no like objective things being funny. But this is a very obvious funny thing in woke moralists owned. I mean, I guess in some sense the woke moralists are getting owned in other ways, and they are getting canceled now. So maybe that was, Jordan Peterson is kind of a prophet for that one. But yeah, no, it's not great. He's probably suffering. It was like something where I read something where he's in such a bad condition that he can't even understand what's happening to him or something like that. It's probably not that, but it was something as terrible sounding. So yeah, hopefully he's doing well. Hopefully he can forgive my noticing of the irony. Obviously, when he says that you need to put your house in order, you have to clean your room, he's not meaning it in a most literal sense, even though it can sometimes be necessarily a literal interpretation. Like, some people do get slowed down when their space is cluttered. Like, some people do need that, but this is a person-to-person thing. Like, some people can operate within clutter, and that's just, maybe part of their trait orderliness. That's a part of conscientiousness. So yeah. Moving on, a reasonably clear distinction between affective and cognitive processes may exist in the brain, at least in the lower reaches, and an understanding of those areas may allow us to make the type of rapid scientific progress that will eventually highlight essential facets of the higher issues. So Panksepp, okay, so this is me. Oh, I'm pointing out Peterson. So Panksepp helps us understand the neurological foundations of these emotions, and Peterson and Hegel and Heidegger hypothesize how we can cognize these emotions. In other words, not only make sense of these emotions, but leverage these understandings into our fuller understanding of the world. Sure. This is like conceptualize, right? Not cognize. For many years, study after study of inbreeding has indicated that virtually any behavioral tendency in animals can be enhanced or diminished as successfully as bodily characteristics. Just as animal husbandry capitalizes on the heritability of physical traits, it is now evident that similar processes contribute to psychological traits in humans and other animals. All right, the absolute storm on the Reddit homepage is going to be of enormous proportions when they find out Jordan Peterson inspired this. Oh, you're saying of this document? Yeah, I think it would. But then again, I'm going to be shamelessly watching Maps of Meaning probably very frequently. I still think Maps of Meaning is just generally, like we were talking about how, it's good to be exposed to certain things when you're young. I think Maps of Meaning is just something that you want to get people exposed to. Like, there's a moral imperative as an influencer to just show Maps of Meaning because it's that important. And if he says something that I think is inappropriate or that doesn't fly with the current science that we have, then I'll just say something. And so what? Yo, Darmadon, what's good? It's another good day. Could you believe it? All right. However, recently developed animals with single gene deletions called knockout preparations have alleviated the need to look for a needle in a haystack. Okay, I don't remember what any of that's talking about. Traditionally, the idea that human psychological dispositions can be inherited has not been well received by the intellectual community. Wow. This might be prior to when the personality traits... Or this is probably when was Evolutionary Psychology released? When was the first edition released? Oh, originally published 1999. So this was actually published after this. Interesting. I'm in disbelief. Also, my knees are shaking. Nice. Oh? All right. Such analyses have great potential for advancing our understanding of how the innate operating systems of the mammalian brain control the behavioral proclivities that characterize different temperaments. Okay. Yep. Personality traits. As well as the emotional disorders and other forms of mental illness that can run in families. Although it is likely that affective proclivities can be inherited, we do not yet understand which genes and what aspects of brain organization are conveying different emotional inclinations. Some appreciation of how things might operate is emerging from ongoing work on various neuropsychiatric disorders. As we emphasize such issues, we should remember that all brain organ systems, even straightforward sensory ones such as vision, are susceptible to modification at the biological level as a result of early experiences, including intratine. We got to figure this one out. First, let's pronounce. Actually, maybe just define and we get a pronunciation as well. Yeah.
Intrauterine.
Intrauterine. Oh, this is literally within the uterus. Wow. Within the uterus is susceptible to modification at the biological level as a result of early experiences. Well, I guess that makes sense. I would just assume it's everything because it doesn't require that like it interfaces with the outside world or that you could consciously think about it. I imagine all these things are like there's propagations from learning mechanisms that affect a lot of parts of our body and brain. I have a dead-ass question that sounds ridiculous. Let it rip. Let it fly. From this vantage, it will be most interesting to determine whether powerful emotional experiences early in life are able to modify the underlying neural circuits for the lifespan of an organism. There are now excellent new genetic and anatomical tracing techniques to analyze such questions at the neural level. So, funny they say that. This is what we're going to be looking at when we go through the notes I have. Notes as in quotes, highlights from The Brain That Changes Itself. So we'll do that when we're going over the shaping of experience section. Where did the whole lovers in love trope go from society? Like, read about any philosopher prior to or during the Enlightenment, and they always have these lovers, whatever that means. Is this evolution? Are we regressing towards the organotan mode of reproduction? Lovers in love. I mean, yeah, it would have to be like, I'd imagine it's like predates the ancient civilizations. Probably comes with language. Like, you know, I don't think like love came with culture. Like, I imagine humans have been loving each other pre-complex language. You know, we see animals love each other for sure. So it's only natural. If dogs could philosophize, they'd have a word for lovers. Jesus loved us before we were even born. Checkmate. Rousseau himself literally learned to read or something from a duchess. What was he doing? He should have written about it. Dude was a player. Wow. All right, the varieties of emotional systems in the brain, theories, taxonomies, and semantics. Okay. I don't think it's talking semantics as, you know, like a full theory of mind semantics, but the semantics of the emotional systems in the brain. So, scholars down through the ages have disagreed about the number and nature of basic emotions. Investigators have not even agreed on the criteria to be used in the classification of emotions. A great deal has been written on such matters, but most of it remains controversial. Until recently, this question could not be approached from a neurological perspective. First, I will consider how we might define primary emotional systems or affect programs, and then summarize the types of basic emotional circuits that exist in the brain. A limited number of powerful primal emotional circuits, those that appear to elaborate fear, anger, seeking, and sorrow, have now been sufficiently well characterized that they can be addressed cogently through brain research. These universally recognized emotions correspond to the infantile feelings that young children exhibit, but this is not a comprehensive list. There are surely others related to sexuality and other more subtle social processes, such as social bonding, separation distress, and play. All emotional taxonomies must remain open-ended until more is known about the brain. I will restrict my discussion here to items that for which reasonably coherent evidence exists at the neural level. This does not mean we understand these systems fully, but we do have enough conceptual, neuroanatomical, and neurochemical evidence to make a solid start. Having a muse would be nice. That would be pretty cool. I mean, it would be cool to have some type of deity system, provided that the deities aren't like punishing us and being mean to us. It would be cool to have angels flying around. I think that would be cool. I mean, all these things would be cool. It's just, unfortunately, we can't say that any of this is even remotely plausible. You ever heard about deity yoga? No. How does that work? Is it, I mean, I would guess and say that there's different intensities or different poses for different deities. But the question is, do they like, would you do ones in different sessions? Or would you switch between certain ones in certain sessions? They fill their mind with an archetype in a very specific and comprehensive way, and then their sense of self changes into that deity. That's really cool, actually. That's pretty neat. And like I have to see that as some sort of play. Like when I say I have to, I mean that's what comes to mind for me. And it's like a play with identity. So you get to embody some personality, some archetypal personality, and then find that in yourself, and you're discovering, you're playing with things. All right. In addition, there's probably a much larger number of affective feeling states that arise from the activities of motivational systems, such as those that mediate hunger, thirst, and sexual urges. Still, others may reflect mixtures, permutations, or evolutionary outgrowths of primary systems that can only be studied coherently once the neurophysiologies and neurochemistries of the brain emotional systems are better understood. Although the primal emotional systems probably arise from genetic dictates, they mold and are molded by experience throughout the lifespan. All right. I heard of it from Shizhen Young One, Western Zen guy. That was his initiation in a different tradition. Okay. He said he did it with Mother Mary. Wow. It's not who I would expect to do it, but that's probably one of the most beneficial ones to do it with, right? Like anyone encapsulating love in any way rather than doing it like with Zeus. Though maybe doing a deity of confidence would help with like a lack of confidence. Maybe that would be a way to boost yourself up. He said he grew up with that image, so it resonates with him. Oh, okay. Yep. Fair enough. Yeah, especially one that's so personal like that. Those who are unable to fully experience and express emotions are considered alexithymic. Oh my gosh. Alexithymic, a psychological condition in which individuals rely excessively on their cognitive rational processes. In their milder forms, such personality styles may be considered sociopathic, while in their most extreme forms they are sometimes deemed psychopathic. Although it is self-evident that external events provoke our feelings actually arise from the activities of ancient brain processes that we have inherited from ancestral species. External stimuli only trigger prepared states of the nervous system. The function of ancient emotional systems is to energize and guide organisms in their interactions with the world, but their powers arises from their intrinsic nature in the brain. It is useful to document the sundry environmental events and cognitive appraisals that can arouse our emotions, such as peripheral studies can only indirectly inform our scientific understanding of how the brain generates emotions. The organizational principle that has been most commonly used to summarize the neural infrastructure of emotional processes has been Paul MacLean's concept of the triune brain. So this is the one that's now out of favor. We kind of use it in this brain's evolved structure, but we try to be careful here. So its development was a cumulative process where newer capacities emerged by forming intricate connections with older, more primitive structures, fundamentally rewiring and shaping their functions. And then we say, to make sense of this complexity, it is useful to adopt a conceptual framework that distinguishes between the brain's functions based on their evolutionary history. While these are not physically separate layers, this model helps us understand how different systems evolved to handle distinct challenges and now interact to produce our experience. So we tried to get around the fact that the triune brain concept is not as widely accepted now, which I think the triune brain concept is one in which you have these layers, these distinct layers. So like the way that the triune brain concept talks about is like physical layers, where we're trying to leverage like more intuitive functional layers that still make intuitive sense. So we still kind of leverage, these three layers, the reptilian brain, brainstem and basal ganglia, then the limbic system, then the neocortex. According to the classic version of this view, which offers a conceptual cartoon of the major... Oh, we just lost something, maybe? I don't know what just happened. Cartoon of the major layers of neural development. The functional landscape of the brain is organized in three strata of evolutionary progress. The deepest and most ancient layers, the reptilian brain. Here are basic motor plans, especially axial or whole body movements, including primitive behavioral responses related to fear, anger, and sexuality, are elaborated by specific neural circuits. The next layer, known as the limbic system, or the visceral brain, contains newer programs related to the various social emotions, including maternal acceptance and care, social bonding and separation, distress, and rough and tumble play. Finally, surrounding these ancient subcortical regions, which are quite similarly organized in all mammals, we have the neo-mammalian brain, or neocortex, which is rudimentary in all or in other vertebrates and exhibits the greatest diversification among mammalian species. The neocortex can come to be influenced by emotions and influences them through various appraisal processes, but it is not a fundamental neural substrate for the generation of affective experience. So maybe that line would be maybe argued now, but I'm not sure if, I think that line would be argued, because that does imply some separation, whereas I imagine that the neocortex is so connected with the limbic system that it does have significant effects on our emotions that maybe wasn't clear here, but I'm speculating. So, although the cortex can be powerfully moved by emotions and the human cortex can rationally attempt to understand and influence them, sustaining and reducing feelings depending on moment-to-moment appraisals of situations. It apparently cannot generate emotionality without the ancient subcortical functions of the brain. So yeah, this would obviously still be true, where the limbic system is a necessary component here. We cannot precipitate emotional feelings by artificially activating the neocortex, either electrically or neurochemically, even though, as we will discuss later, emotionality is modified by cortical injury. So I was making the case that if we were able, or if we could figure out like what parts of the neocortex we could do that make us think a certain thought, like a specific thought, which would be very difficult to do, you know, like when they do stimulation stuff, they're like literally just stimulating a region of the brain. Like they're not stimulating like a complex subset of connections in the neocortex, which I think if you were to stimulate, you would actually be able to cause activation in the emotional regions of the brain. There appear to have been relatively long periods of stability in vertebrate brain evolution, followed by bursts of expansion. The 3 evolutionary strata of the mammalian brain reflect these progressions. The basic reptilian core is of similar relative size in all mammals. Other vertebrates also have an abundance of this tissue in their small brains. While the limbic system is comparatively small in reptiles, it is large in all mammals and also of similar relative size across different mammalian species. Okay. I don't think we really care about a lot of this stuff, so I might start being a little more... I'm seeing how little we're going through the document at the pace of reading it. So maybe I need to be a little more judicious about what we stop and read. Within the cortex, the human brain displays many unique organizational principles, right? Allowing us to speak, think, and plan ahead. Although the remarkable cortical development of the human brain has many affective ramifications, including our ability to conceptualize our emotions in a diversity of artistic forms, to the best of our knowledge, the affective power of emotionality arises from the subcortical systems. As I have argued, the categorical, componential, and social constructivist approaches need not battle over primacy issues. They work best in different domains of inquiry. The categorical approach... Okay, so this is more philosophy of science now. However, the psychobiological perspective seems essential for all other levels of analysis. So this is where he's doing that. I think that taxonomy, maybe. Some scholars, especially those with postmodern deconstructive orientations, believe that psychological processes are intrinsically so complicated by multiple causation that logical analysis through reductionism and manipulation of simple systems will never provide the answers that we need. One response to a proliferation of taxonomies is a movement in the opposite direction, toward a minimalist view of emotions. For instance, it is obvious that emotionality is accompanied by bodily and physiological arousal, and some have claimed that that is all there is to emotions. Taking a somewhat more complex view are those who recognize that behavioral arousal can take you away from objects or toward objects. So the next simplified level of analysis accepts only the dichotomous distinction of approach versus avoidance. So simple valence. Although a simple approach avoidance dichotomy may be defensible for invertebrate species in which neural homologies are too obscure to eliminate the human condition, this dichotomy is no longer a tenable conceptualization of mammalian emotions. There are simply too many facts, such as the distinct varieties of emotional behaviors that can be evoked by electrical and chemical brain stimulation, that should dissuade us from making very general behavioral gradients the foundation for our thinking about emotional matters. That said, we could still think about valence within the topic of emotions, but although it is easy to understand why higher brain areas might tend to cluster and hence categorize events simply in terms of desirable and undesirable outcomes, The neurological evidence summarized here indicates that mammals possess highly specific emotional and motivational systems in subcortical regions from which such generalized affective features may be created. All right, although theorists may have different reasons for classifying a given process, the existence of such processes can also be supported by neuroscientific evidence. As I will summarize in this text, at present there is a good biological evidence for at least 7 innate emotional systems ingrained within the mammalian brain. In the vernacular, they include fear, anger, sorrow, anticipatory eagerness, play, sexual lust, and maternal nurturance. There are many more affective feelings, such as hunger, thirst, tiredness, illness, surprise, disgust, and others, but they may need to be conceptualized in terms other than what we will here call basic emotional systems. Interesting. Accordingly, before any definitive taxonomy of emotions can be established, we must first have a cogent definition of what it means to be a bona fide emotional process. If emotions, feelings, and moods come in several natural types, we must aspire to be explicit about the type of classificatory scheme we are trying to construct. I will develop the premise that discrete emotions emerge from a variety of coherently operating brain systems with specific properties. A panoramic view of the neural systems will allow us to see the outlines of the major emotional neural thickets more clearly. Deleted message. All right. Greater agreement on the use of certain psychological terms will surely be achieved if we anchor them credibly in the objective properties of the brain and body. For these reasons, I will attempt to provide a neurally based definition of emotions, one that specifies necessary criteria, even though it falls short on sufficiency dimension, especially when we start to consider the many reflections of emotions in personality and cultural development. At the same time, it will become quite evident that many distinct emotions also share generalized components such as acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and serotonin systems for the control of attention and general arousal functions. Likewise, glutamate and gamma aminobutyri. We got to figure that word out. That's not the one. How do you pronounce this? Oh, was this a typo? This was probably a typo. Aminobutyric. That's much easier. Aminobutyreads. That's probably not it, but you might be onto something. Control all cognitive, emotional, and motivational functions. The position taken here is that a useful approach to defining emotions is to focus on their adaptive, central, integrative functions as opposed to general input and output characteristics. From this vantage, emotions are the psychoneural processes that are especially influential in controlling the vigor and patterning of actions in the dynamic flow of intense behavioral interchanges between animals, as well as with certain objects during circumstances that are especially important for survival. Each emotion has a characteristic feeling tone that is especially important in encoding the intrinsic values of these interactions, depending on whether they are likely to promote or hinder survival, in both the immediate personal and the longer-term reproductive sense. These affective functions are especially important in encoding new information, retrieving information on subsequent occasions, and perhaps also in allowing animals to generalize about new events rapidly and efficiently. The underlying neural systems may also compute levels of psychological homeostasis or equilibrium by elevating or evaluating an organism's adaptation or success in the environment. Okay. All right, I might call it here. I feel like we're getting getting bogged down now. So that's a lot of 2 hours is a lot of neuroscience for one day. So let's call it quits. But what to do now? I guess we just jump to Hades. I probably should orient my night so that I finish early again, or finish on time at 10, so that I don't go to bed late. All right, so I'm gonna probably switch over in 5 minutes, and then we'll have some fun. So either have a great rest of the day, or I'll